Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'll be sharing my favorite cannoli recipe. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. I spent so much time developing this cannoli recipe. It's very traditional in a lot of ways, but then I do have some subtle deviations from the norm, but I think you're going to love them. This is a completely from scratch recipe, so we are going to be making our own cannoli shells. I think you are going to absolutely love it. Yours are going to turn out just like the pictures if you bake along with me, so let's go ahead and get started. Now the first thing you're going to want to start with is the ricotta cheese that we're going to be using for our filling. I recommend you start preparing this several hours in advance, or even better, do it the night before like I usually do. You're only going to need 1 pound of ricotta cheese for this recipe, but this cheese has a lot of liquid in it, and it's really important that we strain it out so that our filling isn't too runny. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take a strainer and you're going to want to place it in a large bowl. So as you can see here, I have about an inch or so of space between the bottom of the strainer and the bottom of the bowl. We want some room for that liquid to drain without the cheese sitting in the liquid we're draining it from. Next, you're going to need some cheesecloth. Though some people have used paper towels with success, I recommend some cheesecloth, and I'll link to where you can buy some. And we're just going to layer that into the strainer. Now go ahead and portion just 1 pound of that cheese into that cheesecloth. And we'll just cover it with a cheesecloth. I'm just gonna press down a little bit. Now we want to put a little bit of pressure on that cheese so that the liquid really drains out as quickly as possible. I'm going to set a bowl on top of mine. This fits nicely in the strainer, so I'm just going to snugly press it into the ricotta. And then you'll want to place something heavy on the bowl. Again, put some pressure on it to encourage it to drain. I'm just going to be using a can of beans. I actually recommend using something even heavier if you have it. I usually use a big tub of applesauce, but right now I have that in the fridge, straining my ricotta cheese that I put out last night. So with that started, we can go ahead and prepare our dough for our cannolis. Now I prepare mine in a food processor, though I will include notes in the recipe so you can still make this if you don't have one, though it is a little bit harder. You're going to need 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and we'll add this to the basin of our food processor. Now we'll also add 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and I also like to add just a pinch of ground cinnamon. I'm just using 1/8 teaspoon here. Just pulse this until all of the ingredients are well combined. Now the next thing that you need is a single tablespoon of cold butter. We'll just add this on top, and I'm going to pulse until you can't really see the butter anymore, until it's nicely cut into our dry ingredients. Now the next ingredient you need is 1/3 cup of marsala wine. You can use other wines, but this is the traditional one that is used and what I recommend. We're going to pour this over our dry ingredients. And we'll also be adding 2 teaspoons of white vinegar and 1 single egg yolk, just the yolk. All right, now let's pulse this again until the dough is just beginning to cling together. It's still going to be really crumbly, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. We've got the right consistency here because as you can see, if I grab some of this dough and if I squeeze it between my thumb and my fingers, it clings together. It's sticking to itself. So this is actually perfect. You don't need to go any further. Now I'm gonna go ahead and transfer this to a piece of plastic wrap. And to make the dough easier to work with and to get as many cannoli out of this dough as possible, I like to divide it into 2 separate portions of dough. So I'm gonna divide this about in half, and I'll form each half into a nice smooth disc. Now make sure you wrap these really well. Now we'll take these over to our fridge where they're going to need to chill for a minimum of 30 minutes. While the dough's chilling, I like to go ahead and prepare my filling. As I mentioned, I have some ricotta cheese that I was straining overnight, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. See, this is great for draining ricotta cheese. This looks perfect, so I'm going to go ahead and place it in a larger bowl. So we're going to add 1 3/4 cup of powdered sugar in with the ricotta, as well as a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. Now I'm going to mix this with my spatula at first, but then we'll go ahead and switch over to using the electric mixer just to make sure everything is really well combined. Now I personally like to prepare my cannoli filling using whipped cream, which I know isn't necessarily traditional, but it adds such a beautiful texture and a great flavor and richness to the filling. I highly recommend it. So we'll set aside our ricotta for now, and in a separate bowl we're going to combine 1 cup of heavy cream and 1/4 cup of powdered sugar. Now you're going to want to use either a stand mixer or I'm going to use an electric hand mixer. And we'll beat this until we have stiff peaks. Now this is going to take several minutes for the whipped cream to reach stiff peaks, but let me show you how it looks when it's finished. It's super thick and billowy. It resembles store-bought whipped cream, but it's so much better. Now let's go ahead and fold this into our ricotta mixture, and we'll just want to stir everything until it's completely combined. And I usually just do this by hand. I'm just going to cover this and set it in the fridge for now, and now I'm going to start heating up my oil for when my cannoli shells are ready to be prepared. Our oil for frying our cannoli shells is going to take some time to heat up, and you don't want to crank your heat up and do it really fast, so we're going to start warming that now as well. Let's head over to the stovetop, and I'm just going to use a medium-sized saucepan. Now you are absolutely going to need a thermometer because it's so important to make sure you know what temperature your oil is. So I'm just going to attach this to the side of my pan. And as you can see, it's not touching the bottom of the pot. It's really important that this be suspended in the oil, but not touching the bottom. So now let's go ahead and add our oil. You can use either vegetable or canola oil. I am using vegetable oil today. And I'm just gonna fill that pot so it's about 2 to 3 inches deep. Now, once again, you want to keep your heat on medium, and we're going to let that oil come to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. So at this point, your oil is warming up and your cannoli dough should be ready to be rolled out into shells at this point. So let's go ahead and pull that out of the fridge. I'm just going to lightly dust my clean countertop with a little bit of flour, but you don't want to use too much flour because it can actually make it difficult to roll that dough really thin, and it's so important that you get it nice and thin. Now we are aiming for paper thin dough here, so I'm just going to roll this out as thin as I possibly can. Some recipes will actually have you use a pasta maker to roll that dough extraordinarily thin. If you have one, I think that's great and you can definitely use it, but sometimes I don't feel like pulling out my pasta maker and doing all of that, so I just use my rolling pin and go as thin as I can. You can use this recipe to make either traditional larger cannoli or miniature ones. I love mini ones because they're just so cute and fun, and I will leave a link to both the larger tubes and the smaller tubes in the recipe description, but today we're making small ones. Now for small cannoli, you are going to need a 3.5 inch round cookie cutter, and we'll go ahead and make your cuts as close as possible in the dough. This is really important because while with sugar cookie dough, you can usually regroup those scraps and re-roll it out. I found when you do that with cannoli dough, the dough doesn't stay on the tube, it pops open, you don't have like a nice shell with that residual dough. With this recipe, it's just so important to get as many cuts as possible with that first roll. All right, so I'm going to take my first round of dough and I'm just going to wrap it around the tube, and I'm gonna use a little bit of water and just dab the edge there and press the overlapping side tightly into the first side. And you do want to press these really firmly, otherwise the shell is likely to just pop open while it's cooking. Making cannoli can get a little bit messy, so I always like to set up a nice workstation for myself. I just like to use a baking sheet, which I will then line with wax paper, and then I like to put paper towels on top of that, and a cooling rack on top of that. It makes cleanup so much easier. Your oil should be at 375 degrees by now, so you'll want to carefully grab your cannoli and carefully drop it into your oil. Probably better to say lower it into your oil. You don't want to make any splashes here. Now I usually do 2 at a time, and these typically need to cook for about 1 minute and 45 seconds. You just want to go until they're a nice golden brown color. Now once they're cooked, you'll want to very carefully remove them from the oil. Now remember, these tubes do have holes on either side, so you kind of want to drain that oil out of one side so you don't end up carrying it over with you or splashing yourself with it. And we'll just place these on our prepared cooling rack. Now each time you cook a batch, usually your oil will drop a couple of degrees, so you just want to keep an eye on your thermometer and make sure you let it come back to 375 degrees before doing your next 2 cannoli. Of course, you're going to need to reuse these cannoli tubes, so you're going to want to let those cool down for just a couple of seconds, maybe a minute, and then you can either use a pair of paper towels or use your tongs and a paper towel to gently remove that shell from the tube. And then that should cool pretty quickly, so you can go ahead and roll or wrap more of your dough around it. Now this recipe makes about 27 cannoli, even more if you can roll your dough thinner than I do, but I'm only going to show you a small sample today so you don't have to watch me roll all of them. We can go ahead now and start filling these. Now I'm going to pour my filling into a large piping bag that I have fitted with a 4B tip, but the tip really doesn't matter. You just want something that you can fit at least partway into the cannoli. I'll take your cannoli shell, which should be nice and cooled by now, and we'll just pipe the filling into one half. Then we'll turn it and pipe it into the other half. Now, if you'd like, you can add some mini chocolate chips, or chopped pistachios are another great addition. Anything you'd like to garnish the cannoli. Some people like to dust their cannoli with powdered sugar. You can absolutely do that, or dip the shells in chocolate. I mean, there are so many different ways you can fancy these up. It's totally up to you. And that is how you make my all-time favorite cannoli recipe with a thin, crisp shell and a ridiculously amazing filling. I think you are going to absolutely love this, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Please leave me a comment and let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. I'm in love with this recipe.